Thank you very much, everyone, for coming out for the second 8 a.m. session of this conference. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be here. I think our conversation today is going to take a little bit of a shift from what we've been talking about over the last 2 days, but I really look forward to hearing the other presenters in this session and hearing your questions. So my background is in mass communication. What that means is I study the social effects of media specific to body image. So what I've been doing for more than a decade is looking at things like the social effects of media specific to the thin ideal related to disordered eating symptomatology, body self-esteem, negative or positive, body dissatisfaction. And then I've been looking at the other end of the spectrum. So I've been looking at how media could serve as a correlate or a precursor to overweight and obesity. I've also looked at the negative affect associated to both of those things. So I looked at things like weight bias, weight stigmatization, and then the bias and the stigmatization against mental illness. So you may ask yourself, why media? Why do we care about the media? Well, here's why. What we know from the Kaiser Family Foundation is that 8 to 18-year-olds spend approximately 7.5 hours a day with entertainment media. So if you have an adolescent child or a teenager who says, oh no, I don't use my phone in school, or you think they're in bed, they're probably on Facebook. What this tells us is that kids are using media a lot. I know that I don't spend 7.5 hours a day with either of my kids, and they're probably spending more time with media than they are with me. If you look at media multitasking, which means kids are consuming 2 forms of media at the same time, so they may be watching television and then on their phones, they may be listening to music and then on their phones again, this figure goes up to 10.5 hours a day with media. According to parents of kids 6 and younger, they say that their children consume approximately 2.5 hours a day with screen media. Honestly, this number is probably a little bit lower than the reality of it, and that's simply because parents don't like to self-report that their kids spend a lot of time with the media. So we know a lot about negative media effects. We've been studying for decades the role of violence in the media and how it relates to, say, aggressive behavior or aggressive thoughts. But what I'm trying to do is look at the way the media can be used in a more pro-social way. So this project is looking at how an app, this is something that kids use all the time now, can provide reliable and valid data about children's food consumptions. And so what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the measurement, the actual measurement of food intake, and I'm also giving them visual representations of the foods that they eat. So we're going from the pen and paper, check the box, how many fruits did you have today, to using an app for that. Most importantly, I want to teach kids how to be more proactive regarding their overall health and well-being. And we want to identify the ways that new media technologies can be used to help kids make gains in nutritional knowledge and physical activity. So I'm not going to spend any time rehashing the statistics that we've already been talking about the last 2 days. We know it's a problem. We know it's definitely a problem in the state where I live. I'm also not going to spend too much time talking about these individual factors that are really important in considering the causes and the correlates of obesity. It's very important here, and I do want to note that as a media effects researcher, I'm smart enough to know that we can look at these social factors that I'm going to talk about in just a second, but it would be erroneous for me to not also include those individual factors that were listed on the slide. Obviously, it's a complex problem, so when we design studies, we have to do this in a complex manner, looking at all these different factors. So when we talk about the social factors related to obesity, what are we talking about? We're talking about screen time. We're talking about time with handheld devices. We're talking about the content of mediated messages, not just the time. What are they watching? What types of advertisements are they seeing? Are they watching violent programming? Are they watching sports programming? That's very important, because a lot of the messages kids receive about health and exercise come from the media. Go back to that slide a few before. We know that they're spending 10.5 hours a day with the media. What does media use to displace? If they are sitting down watching television, they're probably not doing something else. Social factors also include the household, so it goes beyond media. What we know from social learning theory is that kids model what they see. So if you're in a household where they're watching a parent consume an entire pizza, or they're watching a parent be very active or exercise a lot, that's the type of behavior kids are going to model. What we know from child development research is that all the different factors that kind of shape who kids become, you've got the kind of individual factors, you have these social factors like the parents and the siblings, and you have the media. So that's why I study it, because I think it's very important regardless of the type of effect you're looking at. So what's the negative media effect specific to health? Okay, there are a lot. We're going to highlight just a few. Physical activity decreases, health misinformation is learned. If you've ever had to subject yourself to watching children's programming on Saturday afternoon or after school, what you know is that those food ads do a couple of different things. They'll say, oh, this is fat-free, or this is sugar-free. Let's face it, as adults, we're like, sugar-free ice cream? Yes, we're gonna eat that. So we as adults get sucked in by the advertising. What do you think it does to kids? Kids don't have the cognitive processing skills to think it through and say, oh, okay, well, if it's fat-free or sugar-free, maybe it's actually not good for me because there's something else in it. So a lot of health misinformation is learned. Snacking increases. If you've got kids, you've probably had this conversation with them. You're sitting around, you're watching TV, you're watching a movie, oh, I'm hungry. And I will always say, are you hungry or are you bored? And usually they're bored. So a lot of data suggests that snacking increases as media consumption increases. What's the positive media effect? We could spend the entire day rehashing the literature about the negative effects of media, but there are also positive effects, specific to cognition, affect, and behavior. So if we correct this misinformation about health and food, it can lead to increased knowledge. What this means is that as parents, as teachers, as educators, we have to know what they're watching. So it's not just sending them off to a room and saying, all right, spend some time watching TV while I vacuum or whatever else. We have to know what they're watching so we can teach them what's correct. We can limit exposure to these fun ads. Let's face it, advertising, genius, because they make everything seem cool and fun. So if you watch these ads that are really designated or kind of targeted toward kids, it's like they've got cool characters and cool music and they're dancing around. They're trying to sell a product, just like they do to us. But for kids, they go to the grocery store with the parent and they're like, oh, I want this because this is cool. So if we limit exposure to that type of advertising, what we can do, hopefully, is increase their attitudes or improve their attitudes toward healthy eating and healthy behaviors. Kids model what they see. So if they're watching programming where people are exercising or being active or having conversations about making healthy choices, they're more likely to model that type of behavior. So we can see a positive media effect specific to health. So there's very little empirical data out there that talks about the use of an iPad or tablets or phones in a health context. So what I'm going to do is briefly review what we know about using new technologies and new media devices in a health context, and then we'll kind of shift it to what I'm doing. So what we do know is that there are higher rates of energy expenditure, heart rate, and perceived exertion after kids play certain active games, like Wii boxing or Wii running. So energy expenditure, what they found in this study that's cited below, was that the energy expenditure during these two types of games was comparable to moderate intensity walking. Now, this past summer, I ran a child nutrition camp with several of my PhD students, and here we're playing the tennis game, and we're all like, big forehand, big backhand, and the kids are just like, shh, shh. They're cheating. So if they're cheating like that, they're probably not going to get their heart rate up. But if they're playing the active games, they can get their heart rate up. And several studies have demonstrated that. And one of my earlier studies, what I decided to do was take games that were active, but they weren't labeled exercise, or they weren't labeled it like Wii Fit. Because, you know, it's all about perception. And if you sit a kid or take a kid to a room and say, all right, we're going to exercise using the Wii, they're like, I don't want to do that. But if you get them involved in dance, anyone ever play Dance Dance Revolution or Just Dance? Yes, we can admit it, they're fun. So if you have these kids play these fun games that don't have that exercise label, what you find is that they tend to play longer, they tend to enjoy it, and they don't think that they're working hard. But it does, in terms of perceived exertion and actual exertion, their heart rate goes up. So this is what we know about these new media technologies in the context of health. It can be beneficial, it can help. So why develop an app? There are many of apps out there, including ones that I use on my own smart devices, that help us track food. There are a lot of problems with existing data, and this is not to be critical of any other discipline and the way that we measure food consumption. But when you take self-report measures in kids, you've got a problem. Kids have horrible recall, especially when you start tracking it back a couple of days. And let's face it, self-report measures, kids don't always want to report that they've had 5 pieces of cake or 5 cookies the day before. So you've got a lot of validity issues when you're dealing with kids and self-report. The measurement of food, this is the biggest problem. The measurement of food is not often in serving sizes that they understand. So if you were to say, how much corn did you eat? Did you eat a cup of corn, a half a cup of corn? They'd be like, I don't know. And so that's the problem. If you look at all of the measures, or many of the measures out there, the serving sizes aren't relatable to what they're used to. Excuse me. Children, however, use the media, as you saw from that previous slide, and they're increasingly using things like iPads and tablets. So it doesn't seem challenging. It makes it game-like, because what do they use iPads for? More often than not, to play a game. And then you have games that are reward-based, or they have incentives. So this is something that's already in their wheelhouse. Kids like to have fun. So if you develop an app that's in a health context, but it's fun and you've got rewards and incentives built in, then it's a win-win all around. So the goal of this project, and what I did was develop an app called Track My Plate, and it was really to help kids become more aware of the foods that they were eating, using a visual representation of the plate. So the hope that it would be fun, I hope that it would be fun, but I wanted them to see the food items on their plate, because let's face it, you look at a checklist, all right, how much dairy did you have? How many pieces of fruit did you have? They look at that piece of paper and it doesn't mean anything. If they see a plate, it's going to resonate with them. So the other thing that we did, and this is just taking screenshots from the app on my iPad, what you can see here is the plate, you can see the Cheerios, you can see the blueberries, and then you've got all the different serving sizes. What I want to note is that this went through 4 rounds of beta testing. So we put together what we thought was a pretty representative library of foods and all the different food categories. We went into the schools and we found out that kids were not eating many of the foods we had in the library, and in some cases they were eating things that we didn't have. So it went through 4 rounds of this testing. The thing that we really wanted to focus on was that measurement. So what do kids eat? If you make a lunch for a child, you probably use a packet of fruit snacks. So you buy a box of Scooby-Doo fruit snacks, and it's a packet. So that's something that's relatable to them. Pretzels. Did you have a cup of pretzels? That means nothing to them. Did you have a handful of pretzels? That means a little bit more. Juice, 8 ounces, they don't get that. Juice box, juice bag, they get that. So what we had to do was kind of tweak the measurement with all the different types of foods so that it would be relatable. In many cases, we would say, all right, look at your lunchbox, or look at the tray that you're eating your food on at school. So it went through many, many rounds of testing to try to figure it out. So the target age for the app is preschool through middle school, and what we know is that there are 2 critical points of intervention with all media-based programs designed to improve health and wellness in kids. You really have to get at it before their eating preferences and eating habits are established, and you have to get at it before the patterns or models of physical activity and exercise are established. So basically this means you have to hit them young, because we know once you're 18, 20, 21, 22, you've kind kind of gotten into a rut, and it's harder to change. So we want to target kids when they're younger. Even if they're not selecting the foods for the household, the goal is to teach them to become more aware of what they're eating so that they can just make better decisions. We also know there are many initiatives on the state and federal level, but these programs are not always relatable to kids. If the program isn't something that resonates, it's less likely to be effective. Now, we completely acknowledge that food options are not always in the control of kids. So if you're in a low-income household and you're on the free and reduced lunch program, you are eating the breakfast that's provided to you at school. You're eating the lunch that is provided to you at school. So we are working within the context of each child, not saying, oh, you should have all these healthy fruits and vegetables. Of course they should, but if it's not available to them, if they don't have access to it, we can talk to them all we want about fruits and vegetables. It's not gonna be very effective. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, in your environment, how can you make good choices? So was the app effective? If you look at this very quickly by gender, what we know is that over 2 meals, we asked the kids in the pilot test to record 2 meals. In some cases, they recorded 3, but we asked them to record 2 meals. Boys tended to have more food items than girls. Boys also tended to eat more unhealthy food items than girls. Both of these were statistically significant. Girls tended to have a larger number of unhealthy drinks compared to boys. That was not significant. And in terms of unhealthy snacks, big surprise here, most of them had pretty unhealthy snacks. Boys more than girls. So what we have here is data from 91 kids in pre-K through 8th grade, but 223 unique plates completed. So the 91 kids were asked to fill out at least 2 plates. If we talked to them in the afternoon, they were doing lunch and breakfast. If we saw them in the morning, they were doing breakfast and dinner. In some cases, they did complete 3. What we learned from this is that many kids skipped breakfast, and I'm going to talk about this in terms of how they realized this in just a moment. Girls were more likely than boys to eat breakfast, but less likely to eat lunch. So you get in that social environment, especially 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and they've got that pressure of not wanting to eat a lot of food with other peers. So what we found was that girls just tended to throw away their lunch or it would go back home. Boys, as I mentioned, more likely to eat the unhealthy foods. Younger kids were better across the board. They tended to just eat the meals they were supposed to eat. They tended to eat the healthier foods compared to their older counterparts, tended to make better selections in terms of drinks, so they might choose water or milk over tea and soda, and younger children, not too surprisingly, ate smaller portions of the food than older children. So what we know from all of this is that participants using the Track My Plate app had an easier time recalling the foods that they ate because they were looking at pictures. It tended to trigger, oh yeah, I ate that. Oh yeah, I ate that. That looks like what I ate. So they were able to basically recall it better. And they also reported higher nutritional knowledge. And what I mean by this, we didn't measure, although we will down the road, we didn't measure nutritional knowledge using the scales that are kind of tried and true. But what we were looking at was that awareness. And you would go into the schools and they would put the foods on their plate, and then I would do a screenshot of it, and they would say, wow, I ate a lot of food last night. Or you'd get the flip side, I didn't eat anything. They might have had a glass of milk or they might have had water. So I think that's the first step, that awareness, looking at the plate with the pictures of the food. That made them aware of, oh, I eat a lot, or this looks pretty good, or wow, I don't eat anything at all. It also, what it tended to prompt was kids asking us, is this healthy? Does this look like a healthy plate? Are these healthy foods? So they would ask questions. They wanted to know after they saw it on the plate. So by using these media technologies that they're familiar with, the process of keeping a daily log of food consumption doesn't seem overwhelming or difficult. So this visual representation coupled with the textual information, we feel provides a more accurate measure of the sample's food intake. And this revised measure hopefully will help daily food intake, or the revised measure of daily food intake will hopefully help health practitioners, policymakers, and scholars greater opportunities to change the way children think about and consume food. So if you look at this chart here, At the top, they're recording the food that they eat. It leads to greater awareness of the foods that they're consuming. This hopefully leads to greater knowledge about the foods that they're eating in terms of being healthy or unhealthy. That might lead to improved attitudes about eating healthy foods, which leads to a willingness or a desire to keep doing it. So it just keeps going around. So that's what I really hope is the outcome for this app, that kids just are more proactive in doing so. So the implications, we're using media technologies that they're already using for many hours during the day. So it gives us a better opportunity to teach kids how to make healthier choices. And you might say, okay, but not every kid has an app. Here's the solution to this. Most schools have a lot of technology money. If you're a Title I school, you get technology money. I haven't been in a school yet in Tuscaloosa City, county, and rural areas that does not have an iPad or several iPads. So the app is free. All you do is download it onto the app, so kids can do it at school. Even if they don't have an iPad at home, they can do it at school. I figured that question might come up. So I do want to acknowledge the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication. I was a Senior Scholar Grant recipient, and that allowed me to pay for a computer-based honors student to develop the app for me, and then my PhD students, two in the audience today, who helped me with the Child Nutrition Camp and helped me with the data collection. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Have you looked at how well the children are able to recall what they did compared to what they actually ate? Not what was on their plate, but what they actually consumed off their plate? Does that make sense?
I think so. So the answer is, all the data that I have here is from a pilot test, and what we're going to be doing is kind of a more extended pre-test, post-test matched control group. So we're going to be using the app, we're going to be using pen and paper, and we're going to be using data from parents at home. We're going to be asking parents to take pictures of kids' plates at home, and then kind of matching that with what they record on the iPad or what they record on pen and paper. So that's phase 2 of it. Does that answer your question?
Pre and post. So, I mean, what you serve a child is not necessarily what they consume.
Correct.
So pictures pre and post?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think that's an interesting app, but you mentioned a few times how it's important to intervene at the parent level because they are modeling for their children. Have you thought about developing an app for parents to intervene at that level and seeing what the influence would be on the children compared to the app that you specifically designed for children?
Well, that's an excellent question. I haven't thought it to that level just yet, quite frankly. All the coding that it takes to develop an app is way outside of my skill set, so I was pretty happy to get this app for kids. But I think it's an excellent suggestion, and you're exactly right. I want kids to become more proactive in terms of learning about the foods that they eat, but that's step 1, and maybe the step before that is working with the parents, and I'm just as guilty of it. I make the lunches for at least one of my kids going off to school, and it's not always a healthy lunch for a variety of reasons we've talked about yesterday. So that's an excellent suggestion. All right, thank you.